In today's video, I'm going to talk about my 5-foot Waterbox aquarium, and I'll show you how I've modified two sections in the existing Waterbox Sump into full-fledged frag growing systems. With that said, let's get going. My Treasure Reef aquarium is now a year and a half old, and while I've seeded it with small coral fragments all around, and you can go back in videos and see what I've actually transferred from my other tank, that was not that much. Over a year I've ended up being in a situation that many coral reefers dream of, which is your corals have grown from a tiny fragment into a good sized colony, and now they're trying to either touch the wall or neighboring corals. And this is the time of the life cycle of the tank where you start to cut and maybe propagate the fragments of corals, which we refer to as frags. So what do you usually do is you go in with cutters, maybe bone cutters, or you can just break off a piece, and then you take a ceramic plug, you put it on top of it, and then you need some place to secure this little piece of coral until either you're going to sell it, or you're going to give it to your local shop, or you're going to give it to your friend, or you're going to trade it with somebody else. So there's many different options of what to do with the fragment. But first you need to actually store it somewhere, because unless you have a different separate tank, you need to do something about it. So you can build out of an egg crate a little shelf that can go all the way at the bottom, or you can buy quite a few different solutions where there's a sheet of acrylic and there's a couple of magnets, and basically it becomes a shelf that goes on one of the sides of the tank. So all great options, but one thing with all of this is that it becomes a little bit unsightly, since I want to observe the tank as it was designed, and I don't really want to see those little fragments. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is if you have lots of them, you basically will run out of space for all those shelves. Third reason, a lot of corals require different lighting and sometimes even flow requirements. They have different requirements, and thus you start building multiple shelves. You know, lower corals are going to go at the bottom. Then you have the higher end ones, you want to make sure that it's under the light, etc. So unless you start another tank, what I wanted to do is I've been eyeing the Waterbox Sump for quite some time in terms of what I could do to modify it. And after some thinking and planning, I've converted two sections of this sump into two dedicated frag growing systems or keeping systems, and they're quite different. So the first section is the one between the overflow and the skimmer. So this dedicated section, I think, originally was designed by Waterbox to be some sort of a refugium. So whenever you see a refugium, if you have a little bit of extra water flow in there, you can actually have it as a frag tank. So for that section, it was actually the easiest. I took one of my beloved Hydra 64s HD, so great light, it works very well up on top, has great spread, and I've actually hung it on two wires all the way down just a couple of inches off the water, and then I actually had a section in there for corals. So I've also used a Nero 5 power head, which is an exceptional power head for these small confines, and it worked very well from that perspective. Now this is all great, but it gives you very even par, so even light intensity, which is something sometimes what you want for the same coral. So if you're keeping just Acropora species, so these ones that look like sticks, then it works great. However, if you're looking at lower end, like lower corals, such as maybe some of the frog spawns or goniporas and whatnot, they may not necessarily like as much of a high par as its acropora brethren. So what do? You have a separate section and you modify it and you get a little bit creative. So what I've done with the second section, this is the auto top-off section that Waterbox has these sumps come with, and this is where you're supposed to put a fresh auto top-off water and then you introduce it into the main tank. What I've done is I've used the manifold to run one of the lines into that section, and then it overflows into the main tank, and as long as you are not going super high flow, you don't really have a risk of getting the water outside of the sump. Now, I've also, since I was targeting different types of corals in there, I went with a much smaller light. So it's half of the Hydra 64 HD. This is a Hydra 32 HD. So it's half of the intensity, and it fits perfectly under over this other section. And also it's a little bit higher. And the corals, because they are so low, they basically get half of the par that my other section is getting. So this is perfect for keeping Montipora, different LPSs, Favia, chalices, and whatnot. So you've got, I ended up having two sections. They're quite small, but one is for higher end acropora species that prefer a stronger flow and a higher light. And then I have a section that's for something that prefers maybe a little bit less of a flow and definitely less of the light. And now that I have those two sections, it's perfect because I can keep both types of frags in there. What is also cool is I've added another Nero 5 on the other section. I'm really thinking that what would really be appropriate here is a couple of Nero 3s. I think Nero 5s are way overpowered for what I'm doing, but I didn't have access to any Nero 3s yet. And I had a couple of Nero 5s, so this is what I'm using. And other than that, I actually have a small tang in there that he's really tiny, but I'm using him to control the algae, and I can be transferring him from one section into another. So there's no other species of fish in there, so basically he doesn't need to be as wary of the surroundings. And I also do give him a little bit of food as well. So far it's been working great. The corals really appreciate being cut and then put in the same water conditions and pretty much the same lighting and very similar flow as their main tank. So there's no shock from that perspective. There's no shock of a different system, different chemistry, different alkalinity, salinity, etc. So that's been working great. What I've also done is I've been running it on a shifted schedule. So basically, while my main tank comes on, let's say around noon, and it goes for about 8 hours, and then there's a ramp down. What I'm doing I'm staggering the other tanks so that they come on about 6 or 8 p.m. So that means that the overall light that's on for the whole tank system is a lot longer, and that gives me a bit more stable pH, so I'm not getting a swing down from there. So it works almost as if it's a bit of a refugium. So that's also been a very good experience. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the system, and I think I'm going to continue with this. I have some concerns that it's not as easy to work on as a dedicated tank. So basically there's a lot of crouching, there's a lot of sitting or squatting, and you have to reach in there to grab something. It's also not as easy to maintain, so I'm not sure how good of an idea it is longer term. I'm also now figuring what I'm actually going to do with all the corals. So I've had a couple of local reefers reach out. So if you're interested in corals, let me know, or maybe talk to your reputable local fish store, and maybe we can work something out there. So like I said, I just have coral that I'm interested in finding some new home for it. So overall, the tank is looking great. I think it's been a little bit more stable from that perspective as well. My alkalinity needs have increased appropriately for the frags, but it's a great experiment, and I always enjoy fragging. I also enjoy seeing different coral variants, ability to exchange it for other corals. So just another cool part of the hobby that we participate in. So let me know what you think of this setup. Maybe you've done something similar. What could be the pitfalls? Maybe I'm missing something, or I'm always looking for ways to improve my system. With that said, I hope that this has been educational for you. I appreciate you subscribing and liking this video, and if you're interested in getting to know this tank a little bit better, what my parameters are, or what is my fish selection, you can go to aquaticlog.com and search for treasure reef on the site. I'll also provide a link to this aquarium there, and you can see all of my chemistry up to date in real time, and maybe learn from the equipment that I use as well as its former history and events. With that said, thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.